which means the defense has to actually do something other than exist, right? And if you choose to try to exist against Matt Campbell and Brock Purdy and Breece Hall, but more to the point, Charlie Kolar, you're dead. Like, that was the thing that I was most interested to see against Texas Christian is what does the All-American do against Texas Christian? And turns out quite a whole hell of a lot, right? Charlie Kolar, a Norman native, is going, yeah, you guys like Austin Stogner. Cool. I'm actually an All-American. And I got to match up against Brian Asamoah or Deshaun White or Buki. I plan to go for 8 and 120 with 4 tutties, okay? Like, that's how it feels right now because I don't see what answer does Oklahoma have for Charlie Kolar. I mean, I would ask you, do you bracket the man? Do you ask Buki to match up one-on-one? You can't ask Pat Fields to take over that because De'Aaron Turner-Yell is not a free safety. Like, you just don't have the option of throwing Justin Harrington into this situation, which would have meant the world, right? That's why having a 6'3", 215-pound safety is important because you can match up against 6'4", 230 at the tight end position in a way that, quite honestly, Buki just cannot. Or maybe he can because, against Pro Wells last year, makes play. And maybe that's the kind of player that you're going to need him to be. But my God, dude, if I'm looking at this from a matchup standpoint, Brock, if you got man coverage with Charlie Kolar, check to it, right? I don't care if we're in a running play. Check to it. Throw that man the football.
Hey, I'm right there with you, and it's actually something I'm glad that you bring up because Charlie Kolar, you mentioned how do you handle this guy? Well, you don't, not only from a pure matchup standpoint in the fact that there is no one in your defensive back group or linebacking core that can line up with him one-on-one and feel good about themselves, but you also can't match up with this guy because of who's around him. Like, Iowa State this year, to me, is a little bit down at the receiver position. You're used to them having like an Allen Lazard or a Hakeem Butler on the perimeter, right? And I don't know that they have that presence right now. I really like Xavier Hutchinson, the JUCO guy at wide receiver, and Tariq Milton is a guy going into this year I thought was going to have a pretty strong season. But the constant for Iowa State and what allows them to capitalize on Charlie Kolar so often are the other tight ends on this roster. Of their 3 best, there isn't a guy that they run out there that is less than 6'6", 250 pounds. Think about that for a second. I want to name these 3 specifically to you, RJ, because OU fans need to be aware of just how scary this task is for OU. You've got Kolar at 6'6", 257. That's well known. He has torched Oklahoma in the past, obviously. Dylan Sainer at 6'7", 272, and Chase Allen at 6'7", 240 and more. Now that he's actually put on some additional weight, he's probably sitting around 250, 260. All 3 of those guys can be on the field at the exact same time, and Iowa State will not skip a beat offensively. And that, to me, is what's most concerning for OU, even when you mention just one of them like Kolar. You can't put all of your focus on just one guy because they can have 2 or 3 of them at the same time. And how do you match up with one 6'6", 250-plus pounder when there's another one on the field? I have no idea. I don't think that you can, and I think Oklahoma's aware of that. So going into this matchup, we talk about OU's offense versus Jaquan Bailey. OU's defense versus this crew of tight ends highlighted by Charlie Kolar is what I'm most excited to witness. And I don't know that Oklahoma's equipped to truly handle them if all 3 are used properly.
They used that 3 tight end set on the failed 2-point conversion that, if successful, would have won them the game in Norman last year. And that was Brock Purdy's fault. Like, he just made the wrong read. If he threw it to, I believe it was Chase Allen, who was actually open, that's a different ball game, right? He tried to force it into a slot where Parnell Motley happened to be, which is also important because there is no Parnell Motley here, right? There is no Kenneth Murray here, which is another way of saying you got to depend on somebody else to make that fill, and you got to depend on somebody else to make that play in the secondary. Until last week, I thought that person was going to be Trey Brown, and it still might be. But watching how Deuce Vaughn was able to outrun the secondary, I mean, Trey Brown is a 4-2 guy, right? Pat Fields actually showing some wheels out there. He's not supposed to be that fast. Jaden Davis is, right? Buki is, and on it goes. But, like, I can draw up scheme to give this defense fits if I'm Iowa State. And if I can do it, Matt Campbell plans to do it. And they're going to be at home, and they're going to be in their all blacks, man. I'm so jealous. I'm so jealous. Did you see those things? They're so sweet.
They are slick, man. Man, could you imagine, by the way, if this game was at full capacity, how electric Ames, Iowa will be on Saturday night? I mean, obviously there's going to be, 15K?
Yep.
With those black uniforms and the stakes at hand, woo, this thing's going to be a lot of fun.
Man, you get to wear black at night. Man. Golly, Oklahoma's never going to wear black uniforms, and it sucks. I want a black uni. All right, so around the Big 12, the game of the weekend for me is Texas Christian and Texas for a number of reasons, right? Not the least of which is Texas Christian beat Texas last year, right? And then end up in the Big 12 championship game. But if you wanted to have some panache, you need at least one of them to walk in there unscathed, right? Last year, that was Oklahoma. And I believe even the year before that, it was Oklahoma. This year, it's going to have to be Texas. And after what I saw defensively, giving up 56 to Texas Tech, a team that barely beat Houston Baptist, and Sam Ehlinger looking rough against Keith Patterson's defense, I'm like, man, damn it. And is this game in Fort Worth? I can't remember. Is this game in Fort Worth or Austin?
This year, it is in Austin.
Thank you. Right? So they ought to win this game by 2 touchdowns on talent, but I can't call it, man. Like, I would love to be able to assume that Sam Ehlinger could run Mike Yurcich's offense to great effect. I also know that nobody wants to beat Texas the way that Gary Patterson wants to beat Texas. He loves nothing more than running it up on Texas whenever possible. And yet, I'm not going to pick him because Max Duggan is Max Duggan even when he's healthy, and he hasn't been here of late. And I think having Zach Evans back is the X factor here because, like, if Zach Evans is the dude that we know him to be from North Shore, you might be able to run the ball and play defense and win this football game. But do you think that that's enough? I mean, nobody's been higher on Texas Christian than you.
Yeah, I've been the leader of the bandwagon, haven't I? And honestly, like, I feel pretty good about this team going into this game. I feel probably much better than I should, but at the same time, I still feel pretty good because this is why. I felt like TCU really should have won that game against Iowa State this past weekend because I don't know if you saw Duggan enter the game in the second half and basically look like Superman, but the dude enters the football game and goes 16 of 20 for 241 and 3 tutties in a half. And keep in mind, he's doing this with a terrible offensive line against a very good Iowa State defensive line. And he's also doing this with a whole bunch of new receivers. I thought Duggan was outstanding. I don't know why he didn't play the full game. I still question some decisions there, but at the same time, when I take into consideration, number one, what Duggan was able to accomplish, and number two, that TCU defense with, you mentioned Garrett Wallow, who's running around with his partner in D. Winters. That might be the best linebacker duo in the Big 12 right now. They were so much fun to watch. Obviously, TCU has its stud safeties who are the best duo, not only in Big 12, but maybe in the nation. And then for Tom Herman to come out and say something like, well, Gary Patterson doesn't actually do too much. He just lets his guys run around. I must say, that is a bold move to criticize the best defensive mind in the conference ahead of this kind of matchup. I think TCU's got a shot here, man. Like, they have, obviously, a lot of talent on the offensive side of the ball at the skill position. The offensive line is a huge question mark for me. Texas' defensive line has some studs. That's where the mismatch could come into effect. But at the same time, TCU has the guys to get this job done. And when I look at Texas, you mentioned it. Like, they were not that good or impressive in the game where they scored over 60 points. Like, there were a lot of weird special teams plays. The offense just didn't look all that great, and the defense got torched. I just think that this is a really intriguing matchup, one that, honestly, TCU has a much better shot at than maybe you would have perceived 2 or 3 weeks ago. I don't know if I'm going to pit TCU or Texas to win at this stage. I want to see who's actually going to play for each squad going into the game, but I mean, Texas is an 11.5-point favorite, and I am almost smashing TCU to be a guaranteed cover because of all these factors considered.